Hi, Peter Boyles, and again, welcome back to The Shoot, our YouTube show that we do generally once a week. Thank you to Mark Crowley and to Kelly Michaels. Now, on Saturday mornings, I do 9 to 1 on 710 KNUS, and I get to do some writing. This is an important shoot. It's in our backyard, of course, radio, and then my personal part of it is recovery. And this guy's getting some ink, getting some attention. His name is Vic Vela, and he was at public radio, and his show was Back from Broken, and he's going to probably sit with us in the studio on Saturday. It's an important story. Hey, Vic, good morning. Thanks for doing the shoot, man. Thanks a lot.
Peter, I'm thrilled to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Let's, as the man said, begin at the beginning. How long have you been sober, first of all, before we get to the nuts and bolts?
January 25th, 2015 is my sobriety date. And so that was 9 years in January, and 9 years of one day at a time, Peter.
What was your drug of choice?
All of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like a crock pot, you just throw in whatever you want. I mean, tequila, gin, on the alcohol side, Bloody Marys in the morning, right? And then I was a huge addict of uppers, so cocaine, some meth in there. And then sometimes when you're a little too high, you had to get what you would have to come down on what I called landing gear, which was, Xanax or opioids to kind of level yourself out. And it was a very dangerous way to live for a very long time. And the fact that I'm here with you today on this beautiful day in Denver, I'm just grateful for every single day.
The both of us. How old were you when you started to drink or started to use?
Yeah, I think I would say about 14 or 15 when I found that magic elixir called marijuana and alcohol, and also some hallucinogens as well. I struggled. I think, Peter, this is something that a lot of people who are in recovery can relate to, that our problems started long before we even picked up a drink or a drug. And in my case, I dealt with a lot of issues in childhood. And what that did is when I reached for that drink or drug for the first time, it just washed everything away, right?
Well,
just washed everything away. And it's like, wow, where has this been my entire life?
I call it all the pieces of the puzzle suddenly fit.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's
Do
you have a history of alcoholism in your family?
Oh yeah. And it runs. My dad, I love him to death. He'll give you the shirt off his back, and he served our country. He also coached Little League sports for a long time and youth football, and just a wonderful man. But he struggled with alcoholism.
Sure.
He loved his beers.
Yeah.
And that was really hard. While he was a very good man, and sometimes when he'd get those several beers in him, he became really difficult to be around, right?
Yeah, sure.
And by the way, I think it's important that I mention that he's been sober now for 20 years.
Wow.
So, so while those struggles run in our family, asking for help also runs in our family, and having that humility and courage, Peter, as you know, to say those three little words, I need help.
One more step. Can you look at your
Sure.
grandparents or anybody on a generation ahead to find similar problems?
Yeah, you know what? I'd have to go back a little way, but it absolutely runs on both sides of the family. I don't remember, my grandparents died when I was kind of young, but that kind of, my grandpa was a coal miner, and he and my grandma picked beets in Boulder County fields. We're fourth generation Coloradans. On my mom's side, her roots to indigenous roots to New Mexico go back before the earliest New England colonies. So we have this beautiful connection with with the Southwest and the Rocky Mountain West. But, through that lineage, that Chicano lineage, there absolutely were stories of heartache and self-medicating, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that other kids might have been drinking, but I was medicating. And But it's interesting to understand this disease is, I think, cultural. I think it's in DNA. I think it's predestined. I think that there's a number of things that you and I share. And one of them, I think, is the cultural aspect of it, that it was okay to they gave you the green light to do so. And what are they going to say to you when they're doing exactly the same thing? And so all of us have a place that's called the bottom. Sometimes it's given different names and different terms, but it's the end of the trail. And of course, what I've learned from so many other people is it doesn't mean you had to stop that day. You could have doubled down. You could have kept going until you found another crossroads. Where was the moment, the time, the place, Vic, where you said, I'm done? What happened?
Yeah, it's an important question. And, there comes a time in every addict's life where we got to, have that come to Jesus moment, so to speak, right? Yeah. And in my case, everyone asks, what was your rock bottom? Was it when you were thrown in jail? Was it when you had health issues? Was it when you did this? For me, and I'll answer it more in depth, but the simple single word answer is exhaustion.
Yeah.
So when things got really bad, the Cliff's Notes version of my story, Peter, was I was, I don't think my use really got any more out of control than your typical college kid. I had a fake ID. I'd go to the bars, stay up all night studying, and then, the occasional hit of LSD at a Grateful Dead show or something. So, and I got good grades, and I went into my profession. Right out of college at MSU Denver, I got a job as a sports anchor in Amarillo, Texas, and my career was on the upswing. I was 22 years old. My face was on billboards in town. I was interviewing, Jerry Jones and Bobby Knight, and it was a pretty exciting time. But along that trajectory, Peter, what also was rising was my addiction to cocaine, and that's really what became my master in life. Cocaine was my master. And to the point where, the weekend warrior stuff, like partying on Friday or Saturday, became every day of the week.
Sure.
Became, I'm about to do the 10 o'clock newscast. I'd go into the makeup room, adjust my tie, take a shot, and, do a couple lines off the sink, and I'm off to the races. And when you live like that for a long time, anyone who's done heavy drugs like that for years, and in my case, it was about 15 years of near daily heavy drug use. It resulted in a lot of problems. And it culminated when I was covering the state capitol as a member of the Colorado Capitol Press Corps. And, I'd go out, I'd be there in my suit and tie, covering the legislature and all these important bills that lawmakers are working on. And I'd duck out every so often to some alleyways in off Colfax and hide behind a dumpster and smoke crack.
Yeah.
And then hide the pipe and then go back inside and go interview the governor, right? Like, our world becomes so, the way I put it, Peter, is, and this is something you can maybe relate to, is that for me, drinking or using drugs became like brushing my teeth.
Oh, sure.
It's just what I did.
Of course.
And one night, I'd been up for days. I was out of money. I had been high for a long time. I was sitting there alone in my apartment, petting my dog, and I'm listening to sad music. Boy, it was like a country music record, really. And I had a question, and I asked myself a question, and it was the most important question I've ever asked in my life. are you really going to do this again tomorrow?
Yeah.
And then I called someone and asked for help, and the rest is history, as they say. So for me, it was just that waking up each morning in constant damage control is a hell of a way to live.
You've said it as well as it can be said. And there comes, I think many people watching this will get that, will understand what you're saying. And it's been described as you're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
The bottom. I had a mentor in this who said to me, Peter, there's only 3 ways that guys like me and you end up. And he said, we end up in an institution, jail, or a hospital. We end up on a morgue slab, or we end up in a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Vic, I was sure there was a 4th way.
Yeah. Yes.
2 weeks later, I'm back in his office and tears, and I can't find my way. And then that's the moment. And it's been said, and it applies to both of us, applies to many people watching. You could have doubled down. You know, it wasn't necessarily the end, but it was the end for you. But some people will just continue downward and downward and downward. And the late Bob Cote always said there is no such thing as a helpless or a hopeless alcoholic and addict. Everybody always has some hope in them to pull this together. So how many years, you say it was, I think you said 9 years that you've been well. And then you begin, and it took me a year, more than a year, to give it up on the radio that I was alcoholic and an addict, and there were people that were angry at me, and I find out in the long term, a lot of people you help. So you've taken that to another step. Talk about you pull away from one career and begin another, if you would.
Yeah, and I want to touch on something you just said, which is really important about that idea of hope and never losing hope. The way I put it, Peter, is as long as you're above the ground, there's still hope.
I agree.
And because I have sat in meetings next to people, I'll sit next to a guy who was in prison for 20 years. He's got 1 million tattoos. He racked up a bunch of felonies. This big, bad motorcycle dude who probably kicked in a lot of heads in his life and doing a lot of drinking and drugging. And he's sitting there bouncing his little granddaughter off of his knee.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what it's all about. Like, I don't want to hear from I know it's hard. I know it's hard.
Yeah.
But we can do it. And that's why I always have, people ask, what's your message? It's 3 words. We can recover.
I was at Step Denver Thanksgiving, and a woman was there, a little old lady, and this almost self-described, and she had tears in her eyes. And I said, are you okay? Can I help you? She said, this is the first Thanksgiving I've had with my son in 23 years. And he was in the program, and you could see he was doing what we call the white knuckle, but he pulled it through, and he's done well. So Beautiful. Now you come to Colorado Public Radio.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So, when when I got sober in 2015, I really dedicated a lot of time to getting better, doing exactly what my sponsor and everyone in the program told me to. I had to do the opposite. It's like, I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan, Peter, but for anyone listening, that episode where George's life was falling apart. So
he goes the other way.
He starts doing the opposite.
And it works.
It works.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I started doing. I'm like, my default setting is to push back against all this and to put up a wall and to not listen to anyone and try to find that 4th way, as you talked about, right?
Yeah.
Like the bartering we do with ourselves. But this time I'm like, I'm desperate. I need help. I'm going to listen and do everything that everyone tells me. So going to meetings, getting a sponsor, telling my story. And it was probably about a year into my recovery, same as yours, when I just opened up about it. And frankly, I did it because it was just easier to be one person to everyone, right? And I also wanted to help people. And because the thing about, and when you're in the throes of addiction, you feel like you're all alone, and you feel like nobody understands what you're going through. And when you can sit up on a chair and tell your story, and that newcomer is in the audience and he's listening and he's thinking to himself, wow, this guy used to drink like I do. This guy used to use drugs like I did. And he ran from the law like I did, right? Like all these, he's checking the boxes. Like I can hear my story in this guy. And that's where the money is, right? So I'm like, well, how can I do that given my platform as a journalist who is used to interviewing people, telling stories, and my background as someone who's in recovery. And at this point, I was with Colorado Public Radio, the first job I ever held sober. And I went to my news director at the time, and I called her one day, I said, I want to do a podcast about recovery. And they did it. I mean, we did it. And it was called Back from Broken. And it ran for 4 seasons. And basically, we wasn't reinventing the wheel. It was just one person in recovery, the host, talking to another person about their own journey. And the response that we've gotten from all walks of life had just been tremendous. Interviewing people who are well known, like Jim Belushi and the Lumineers, and Jake the Snake Roberts from professional wrestling.
True favorite, yes.
Absolutely. And then I used to play with his figurine when I was a little kid, and now I'm talking to him about addiction. It's amazing. Yeah. And then just everyday folks in our community telling their stories. So the response, Peter, as a broadcaster, when you say something on the air and that immediately triggers some feedback from a listener. And I'm sure you've gotten a diverse set of feedback. I'm sure you've gotten some beautiful feedback over the years, right? The ones you hold on to when you're having a rough day. The response that I got after creating Back from Broken was overwhelming, and it continues to be, emails and messages online from mothers and fathers who say, because of this show, I could understand what my son is going through. Because of this show, I had the courage to walk into a meeting today. Well, what a gift that is. And I'm very proud of what we did. Yeah.
And then ... what happened?
Yeah. And let me kind of pause here for a sec, Peter, before I get into sort of the heavy stuff, which is, spoiler alert for anyone who isn't familiar, there was a falling out involving me and CPR, which I'll talk about. And it pains me to talk about it. You know what it's like to work at a station and you become so close to your coworkers, the on-air talent, the producers, the tech guys, the IT guys, the person at the front desk who answers the phone, like all these people. It's not just the things you hear on the radio. It's all those people who make up radio, right? And how much I love so many of those people, and how much Colorado Public Radio is a family to me for a very long time. Unfortunately, that changed. And the culture there has shifted over the last really couple years. It went from a really nice mom and pop operation that a lot of people really respected. And the work is still respected. The journalists do tremendous work. But then it just took on a more corporate feel, which anyone who works in radio these days can absolutely relate to, that top brass being disconnected from the everyday workers, from the everyday people, from its listening base. And in my case, it's important to educate people about when it comes to recovery. A huge part of my recovery, and really anyone's recovery, is recognizing triggers. So, if you're a few months into recovery and you walk past a dive bar and some guy's sitting there nursing a beer, that could be a trigger, right? Like, that's a pretty obvious trigger.
Right.
But triggers can come in cloaked ways, right? They don't always have to come in the form of drugs and alcohol. It's like the Adam and Eve story, right? Like the serpent, right? Like it can come in many different forms.
You hear the voice.
You hear the voice when someone cuts you off in traffic. You hear the voice when you have an argument with your boyfriend, your girlfriend, right? It just and then when that trigger happens, then we got to take care of ourselves, right? We got to call our sponsor. We got to do the work. But as I was working for CPR, those triggers were happening more and more often because of the way management was treating people. And because I felt that I had an open and honest dialogue with everyone, I wear my life is an open book. I would tell station leaders, station brass, that guys, the abysmal morale, the way you're treating some people, the financial difficulties, I got to tell you, as a person in recovery, it's causing me problems with my recovery. It's causing triggers. And I laid out some steps, laid out some ways that they could help me, really simple accommodations. Like I was, the head of the podcast unit was getting a lot of complaints. He was, in my opinion, he was mistreating people and in others because others filed complaints against him. That's also where Back from Broken lived, was in that unit. And I said, I don't like how he's treating me and my recovery. Can we move it to this different department in the newsroom? And on top of that, I will take on much more work. I'll do all the work. That way that you don't even have to add resources to this. That was one example of seeking that accommodation, that reasonable accommodation that was rejected. And Peter, not only were my pleas ignored or rejected, I was also mocked by, particular people in leadership who said that, I was just, there was one conversation I had with a station VP who I said, because I'm a recovering crack cocaine addict, I'm like, guys, I'm trying to recognize these triggers so I don't go running off to the crack house. We don't want that to happen. He took that as a threat. And he suggested that I was using my addiction to manipulate them into getting something I wanted. Now, Peter, I'm going to pause there. I see you bowing your head. And I could just see a lot of people who have ever been in recovery have the same expression out there. The insinuation that how many funerals I've been to, how many tombstones with the names of my friends and family, and now I dedicate my whole life to just helping people with this disease. The insinuation that I would use this in that kind of way that he suggested was insulting, downright insulting. So those are just some examples. And rather than help me, Peter, and rather than meet me halfway or have conversations about this stuff, they decided it was just a lot easier to just fire me.
Sure.
And that's a common story when it comes to people who have the courage to open up about their issues related to, in this case, addiction, to their employer.
Vic, did they fire you face to face, or did you get the phone call, or did you get the email? Because, generally it's a very, they don't want you in the room when they do it. How did it go down on you?
Yeah, I wish I could say, Peter, that they invited me in, handed me this huge check, said, thank you for your service. We're going to miss you, but it's time to... None of that. I got a text message.
Text. Okay.
I got a text message from the station VP saying, Vic, me and the human resources head are going to call you in an hour. They called me in an hour. Before they even called me, I no longer had access to my work computer. They shut me down.
Yeah.
So all the contacts that I had built up and the sources I had built up in over 10 years, gone. Yeah. And then they, over the phone, Peter, and this is really important. They said, we're firing you for insubordination. And I said, well, what about unemployment? Nope. They said, no, we're going to fight you on that.
Yeah.
After 10 years of dedicated, loyal service where I gave my heart and soul to this organization, won 5 Murrow Awards, Edward R. Murrow Awards, moved so many lives when it came to addiction and recovery, and told stories of the little guy and the people and the voices you don't hear a lot on the radio. They fired me. And now I'm without any sort of income at all.
Now, I downloaded a bunch of stuff from what's been written about you and said about you. The CPR says your allegations are false. That's one headline. They seem to want CPR denies ex-host's allegations. What's the next couple of steps? What happens next?
Well, first of all, it's important to note here that it's, as my lawyer said in a public statement, that it's really unsurprising for an employer who has been called out on discriminatory or retaliatory conduct to respond that way, right? Yeah. They're never going to concede, oh, okay, you got us, right? They're going to try and mitigate liability. And just one note on that, Peter, like I think the people know me, and I think that's what makes their claim so laughable. People know me. Yeah. As I said, my life is an open book. What CPR is trying to paint me out to be flies in the face of what the public knows me to be. So if they want to do that, that's fine. They can do that. But I have my story, and my story is the truth. Where we go from here, my lawyer and I have filed complaints with the Colorado Civil Rights Division and the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That's the first step in the legal process. And we go from there.
How long do you think it'll take? And I realize that you really can't know that, but
it's really that. It's really hard to say, as anyone who's gone. And then we don't know what the end is, because is this just the start, or is it, are we going to maybe, sit down and resolve this with CPR? We'll see. But in the meantime,
they can wear you down too. They can just wear you down.
Well, and Peter, just yesterday, the CEO, Stuart Vanderwilt, sent an email to all donors, CPR donors, referring to me as this employer, this former employer. So they're 10 years of service to them, nearly 10 years of service, and they're erasing my existence.
We're going to see each other on Saturday. You're going to do our morning show with us, but I tell you some off-air stories about after X amount of years working, not getting vacation pay when they let you go, or, and it's become, and what was interesting to me, having spent, 15 years with public television at Channel 12, they prided themselves. I mean, if I, just in what I know about radio, if I'd have picked the place that was going to do something like that, I would have never picked CPR. I mean, I would have not, because, they were always the, the most woke, available media outlet. Channel 12 certainly is. And I thought, well, what would happen in the rough and tumble world of AM or FM radio? But it happened to you, and you're a podcaster. I mean, the whole thing just stinks. And I've read what I can read, and I know they put out some statements, but I hope people can get full value of you here, and you're going to be with us on the morning show on Saturday mornings. I know how it feels to get let go and to have it in the papers, and my case was have it on Channel 9, and that goes with what we do. Yeah. And I look at it that way, that this is the game we have chosen to play. This is the life we have chosen. But when it comes to this stuff, I think it crosses a line. And there's a ton of people out there that either are well or getting well or struggling to get well. And this certainly can't help them at all. Your thoughts?
That you said it, that last thing you just said is so important.
Yeah.
Because what's the thing that really prevents people who are struggling?
Shame-based.
For reaching out for help in the first place. It's that shame, the stigma associated with it. How many times you're at a bar and you see a guy stumbling and he stumbles over the seat, and you may say to yourself, oh, that guy's a lousy drunk, right? Like our society's first instinct is to paint people as just bad people who are worthless, and that's where that stigma comes in, right? Yeah. Now, after what I've gone through, as someone who is in such a high-profile position as me, whose job was literally to talk about addiction, to talk about stigma, Peter, what am I supposed to say now to the guy who's a waiter or a dishwasher working the night shift at a restaurant, who's a month sober, who was thinking about opening up to his employer about his recovery needs? Maybe he needs to take off for a meeting or something every so often, right? Like, what am I supposed to say to that person who's nervous about opening up to their own employers when my employers have attached and reinforced that same stigma to me?
Of everything that I've read about you, and now finally we've talked on the phone, but finally listening and seeing, that was what was clear to me after all these years. Folks that have shared the disease, it really is shame-based. I mean, it's as people said, it's a disease of secrets, it's a disease of lies, but it's also shame-based. And when guys get well or struggle into wellness, I think there comes a moment of pride, but I think it comes a little later in the game, and you take pride in that you're not dead, maybe just that much that you're not dead, but to be a model, to be a role model to, people, especially now with addictions skyrocketing, with the kinds of drugs that are in, don't you say to yourself, thank you, because fentanyl wasn't here?
No.
Seriously,
absolutely.
Because you'd have tried it.
Yeah.
Of course.
Peter, and I kind of just barely made that cutoff line when I stopped using. Because now it's not just fentanyl itself, as you know, it's the illicit fentanyl that, right? And then that manufactured crap. And then it's in not just the opioids, it's in cocaine, right? It's, and so now people who have no history with addiction, they take one pill, they just want to try it. Some teenage
first time
kid,
out,
they're gone.
Yeah. Then they become frequent flyers. And then there's all these different terms that go with it, chasing the dragon, different things that are said. But the bottom line is, you're living proof.
That's and that was your larger point, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, Peter, about it's so important for me to bring it all back to gratitude.
Of course.
And
if we don't, who will? You know, like.
That's exactly right. And someone watching this right now made me scratch in their head, like, wow, the way his employer treated him, now he's out here talking about gratitude. Gratitude keeps me from picking up a crack pipe. Gratitude keeps me from walking into a bar. There are, Peter, so many people who have it a lot worse than I do, and who don't have nearly the kind of support system that I have. So I had to keep that in perspective and maintain gratitude that I'm alive. You know what? I'm alive, and I've overcome a lot in my life, and I'm going to overcome this.
We end it here, and we pick it up Saturday morning on 710 KNUS, and you're going to be in studio, and this is a story that needs to be told and retold, because it's, I think it happens a lot in the private sector away from the eyes of the press. In this one, the guy gets popped, and he's one of us, and it has to be told. You're terrific. I enjoyed this immensely. We have a saying in recovery that I'm sure you've heard. We all tell the same story. We just tell it a different way.
Yeah.
But, you know, your story's mine is another guy's, and a lot of other people, they tell the same story. They tell the early drinking stories. They tell growing up, and this what happened, and that what happened, and this what happened. We all tell the same story. We just tell it a different way. This will be up, and people will see it. And Vic, you're now a friend, man. Thanks for doing this, and I'll see you on Saturday morning.
Peter, thank you for what you do, man. You take care, my friend.
Thanks, brother. Okay.
Bye-bye.